Welcome to the Altitude Show. I'm your host, Dave Brinker. Well, hello, everybody. Today I have John Barklow on the podcast. John Barklow and I worked together for several years at Sitka Gear. He is still there today as one of the product leaders. He is a veteran. He's a mountain climber. He's a skier. He's a badass hunter. He's been teaching survival for multiple decades in the harshest conditions possible. He's been developing systems for those conditions for multiple decades. He has a wealth of knowledge. He's now an entrepreneur, which we dig into. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening. The Altitude Show is brought to you by Peaks Equipment, the world's leading technical, hard goods, and accessories brand for backcountry enthusiasts. From trekking poles to headlamps to best-in-class gaiters, Peaks delivers a system of products that work to achieve optimal performance in the harshest conditions. Don't suffer on your hunting adventures. Peaks enables you to thrive on the mountain when everyone else is going home. Visit peaksequipment.com and use code ALTITUDE for 10% off today. That's ALTITUDE for 10% off on peaksequipment.com. Outdoor Class is the new source of premium outdoor education from trusted and knowledgeable experts. For hunters committed to improving their skills, Outdoor Class is the only subscription-based e-learning platform that provides unlimited access to video lessons from the world's most respected experts. Learn from industry leaders like Corey Jacobson, Randy Newberg, Remy Warren, and other experts across all the topics that affect you as a hunter. Make sure to follow Outdoor Class Official on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and take your game to the next level by going to outdoorclass.com. You can use code ALTITUDE at checkout for 20% off. That is ALTITUDE at checkout for 20% off at outdoorclass.com. Well, welcome everybody to the Altitude Show. I'm your host, David Brinker, and today I have a friend, past coworker, and just a straight inspiring person, John Barklow, on the podcast. And if you listen to the intro prior to this, you'll know that he is way cooler than I am. So if just know that if I say anything, it's most likely that John has a rebuttal that's way better. So with that said, welcome, John.
David, it is such a pleasure to talk to you, man. I was so stoked when you reached out, and congrats on this new venture.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about you for a second, buddy. I mean, everybody knows you work at Sitka. Sitka Gear, for those who aren't in the hunting industry, is the leading apparel company in the world for hunters. And John has been an integral part in building that product. And I worked with him for 3 or 4 years?
I think 4, yeah.
Yeah. And together we had some really fun projects, a couple of which are still my favorite projects I've ever had the chance to work on. But the reason John can do that so well is he has a whole lifetime of experience in some really cool shit. And that's what I want to dive into, is because now, John, you're working on what's called Knowledge from the Storms, which is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a platform where you share valuable information for outdoors men and women on survival and gear optimization, efficiencies, everything you can think of to make you a better, more prepared person in the outdoors. John focuses on, but your specific expertise, which I think is kind of what I want to dig into first because I find it fascinating, is around survival. And can you tell us, just for people that don't know who you are, can you tell a little bit about your past?
Yeah. I think you framed it up pretty good. I won't go all the way back, but after I had got lost in the woods as a kid and spent a couple cold nights out, I decided I wanted to join the military, basically because I was looking for adventure. And that was a long 26-year journey. And, a large portion of that was directly supporting the SEAL teams. And at some point along that journey, of course, 9/11 happened. While I was in the military, I was kind of pursuing my own outdoor pursuits, hunting, skiing, climbing. And I thought maybe I'd become a mountain guide. Didn't know if I was going to stay in the military or not. So I was kind of pursuing that on the side. And then 9/11 happened, and I was one of, a handful, 10 people, 12 people, selected to go up to Alaska and basically create a training program and the gear to go with it and the tactics to go with that, to get guys in the mountains of Afghanistan and be able to fight, live, survive, essentially everything that a backcountry hunter would do, but the prey is different, right? So it was a great opportunity for me to learn from the best and then teach and then learn from the students. And it was really where my experience level grew, and I became what I consider a professional at that point.
Why did they choose you? There's 10 people on Earth that got chosen. And it's not meant in any derogatory way. I'm just purely curious. Like that's a pretty huge honor.
Yeah, no, it was. So there's lots of context there, but I told you I was going through this, qualification of professional mountain guide, when I could, here and there, on vacation, etc. But there was a need at the team I was at to also provide this training, and really nobody at the time on the West Coast, I was in San Diego, could do that. And so I kind of volunteered my services, which you're going to see kind of a common theme here, depending on how this progresses, where you see an opportunity, you have something to offer, you take a bit of a risk, and you see where it takes you. And so I offered my services to take these guys out and train them. They were a little reluctant, of course, at first. I did it. The first trip went great. It was a winter trip. Then I took them out on a summer trip. The next thing you know, I'm augmenting the training staff at this team. I'm traveling with platoons up to Alaska to augment the training staff up there. I may or may not have helped some high-profile officers in the Navy climb some mountains like Mount Rainier. So my name started getting out there. It's just this person that they could tap into. Now, mind you, this was all pre-war. So, we'd go out, we'd train, we'd have a fun time, have some difficult experiences, but learn from it. When the 9/11 happened, what the special operations community realized was most of the institutional knowledge from the Cold War days, which is so, like, the last couple of weeks have been pretty interesting to me.
Super relevant right now.
Whole Ukrainian thing, but that institutional knowledge retired. It aged out of the military, and we kind of got caught flat-footed in some regard, having to go to Afghanistan and in the winter. So I was just one of a few people that they knew about who kind of had relevant, up-to-date qualifications, and that they thought could, get something going really quick. So I was kind of at the right place at the right time. The investment of my time I'd made in the past paid off. It's still paying off, right? I was even able to parlay that, as you said, into my, my existing civilian career. So that's kind of how that happened, David, is just happenstance.
Isn't that how most cool things in life happen? And I loved what you said about, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something where opportunity comes and you have to take a little bit of risk. You took advantage of that several times in your life, and this was one of them. It's like, man, I already love doing this. I'm being asked to do it for like a really good cause to serve,
right,
for something that was really traumatic at the time, which is 2001, September 11th. And so then you find yourself up in Alaska, and you're being asked to train like the highest level of not only athletes, arguably, but of our military.
Right.
Like, how do you wrangle that in your mind?
Well, I was very confident in what I could do, in the mountains, in the field, where I had to, put my ego in check and actually become very humble and become a student again, is learning some of the, we'll call it the tactics, and learning what those were, and then trying to create what they could be, learning from a lot of people, skill sets that I didn't know. It was kind of a drinking from the fire hose situation. But I think it was a mutual thing where everybody who was selected on that team brought a slightly different skill set. And so we were all kind of learning from one another at the time. And really, looking back, it didn't seem like it at the time, but really we spent right after, so September 11th happened. I think Jules and I were up in Alaska end of October. So not very long afterwards. And we spent a year as that cadre, basically learning and teaching one another, and then bringing outside people in to build the skill sets that we didn't have. So, by the time we actually started teaching and had students, we were all, not that we weren't still learning, but we were all pretty good at what we needed to be good at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because even at the time, I didn't realize it, but people didn't realize that you always think of Afghanistan as this like dry, desolate desert, and at the time, I can't remember exactly when the United States decided to invade Afghanistan after 9/11, but it was, Afghanistan has humongous mountains and they're like treacherous. The weather's awful. That's what made it so tough over the years to fight in those conditions based on, from what I've heard. I mean, obviously I'm no expert. I did not serve over there, but so this training that you're providing, it is all of a sudden out of nowhere extremely valuable, where maybe that type of war hadn't happened in a while, right?
Yeah, well, it not only had it not happened in a while, we'll just say cold weather,
right,
a little bit of mountains in Korea, but we went into the northern part of Afghanistan in the beginning. And so that's really the foothills of the Himalayas, the largest, that's where Mount Everest is and some of those. So, I mean, you're in the foothills of those mountains, 14,000 feet, incredibly steep. A lot of it looks like places in the West. But it was, we didn't have the equipment. We didn't have the clothing, we hadn't flown helicopters, in those conditions, challenging areas, at those altitudes. So there was so much to learn, that's kind of what caught us flat-footed. And it didn't help that, we went in very soon thereafter. Some people did. It was winter already. So you're talking winter in the foothills of the Himalayas, and you're running around in, cotton clothing and whatever boots you could buy at REI. And, that's 20 years ago, so we can talk about it now, but we were at a real disadvantage. The only thing we had to our advantage was, some technology, but the guy on the ground still had to kind of suffer through. And so that's what we were trying to figure out, is how to help those folks and bring everything up to current day. I would say the military at that point, from what I was dealing with, we were probably 20 years behind.
No way. So you have a short period of time to remedy that, right?
Very short period of time.
So what do you focus on first? Because you can't train somebody to be an expert in conditions like that in a couple weeks. So you got to choose. You got to kind of cherry pick what you're going to teach these dudes. I mean, they're by nature tough as they come, right? So they're going to figure it out. Like they would probably figure it out in that cotton shit clothing, but you're trying. Okay, you're taking a super tough, mentally and physically person, and I have a finite amount of time to train them to be the best they can be. What do you focus on?
The same thing you focus on with shooting a bow and playing guitar and building a business and probably parenting. I don't know for a fact. It's the basics. You have to concentrate on the basics, because one, that's all the time you have. And two, the basics are going to build the foundation of anything else, you or I or they would do on top of that. I would say that being tough, it definitely has its advantages, but it can also be a disadvantage, because when you go into unforgiving environment like a high altitude environment, and then factor in the cold, those things can hurt you. They can kill you. And so you have to be tough, but you also have to know enough to go, we need to do something else or pivot here, because the environment is, could be just as treacherous as any enemy could be. So it was kind of a balancing act, and that's why you go to the basics and you taught the person to take care of themselves. And once everybody was able to take care of themselves, then you said, okay, now you can take care of yourself. Now take care of your buddy. And so now you're looking out for each other. And then that's how you just slowly build a team out, right?
It's like a chain reaction.
Exactly.
It's like what they tell you when you get on the airplane. Like, if we crash, you want to take care of yourself.
Take care
first.
of yourself.
Yep.
Yeah.
So from obviously you and I have a lot of experience with apparel, but at the time, what did you integrate into their systems? Like, from a clothing perspective, if they're just wearing this junk, like how did you guys remedy that? Because I would assume that's probably, besides shelter and all the normal necessities of survival, that's one of the most important things that those guys are going to take into Afghanistan with them as their clothes, right?
Yeah.
And this is pre. Well, okay, so this is 2001. There was lots of technical mountain apparel at that point.
Yeah, and so that's what we did, right? It sounds embarrassing. It sounds embarrassing, but at the time we basically just gave them a list of here's 3 kinds of pants, 4 kinds of boots, et cetera, and everybody got a couple grand to go buy it themselves at REI or Sitka Gear or wherever else they could find it, and it was literally just a hodgepodge of stuff. I mean, it looked like there was no like uniformity to it at all. But as that was happening, we were bringing in professionals in the industry, the outdoor industry, to help us build out more of a uniform system, which eventually became known as the PCU, Protective Combat Uniform. That was really the first technical clothing system ever for the U.S. military.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that was it.
It's insane to me. Because how long had technical mountaineering clothing been around by that time? 15, 20 years?
That's why I'm telling you the military was 20 years behind everybody else.
Is that, hopefully that's not a common theme across all of history, that we're always 20 years behind.
I don't know about the 20 years behind, but that's just such an unforgiving environment that, the desert, the jungle, they're pretty obvious,
right?
But nobody expected to be in, if we'd have gone into the southern part of the country where it was more desert, I think we'd have been fine. But the northern part in the winter was just kind of just a bad deal all mashed together.
So how long would you get with these guys, each group?
No more than 30 days.
Okay. So they're up there for a month.
Yep.
What does that month look like?
Yep. Like I said, it's the basics. It's everything from, personal hygiene to how to feed and hydrate yourself, the basics of clothing, how to use the gear, a couple different kinds of stoves, how to set up your tent. But you guys would do like
expeditions out in the backcountry. You would take them.
Yeah, you do courses, probably in the field, sometimes in the classroom. You teach the course, and then you go to the field. Like in the military, they call them exercises. You go and do an exercise, right? Or an operation. And then you come back, you debrief it, you teach some more courses, and then every time you went out, you're building on skills that you had taught, say the week before. And then, those guys would go, that's the basic course. And then either we'd have people come back to us, or at the time we were traveling around at what they called mobile training teams, and we would travel to people because they needed refresher. They needed specific information to do a specific thing.
Yep.
We'd travel to places with altitude. Guys wanted to know how to ski, whatever the case may be. And so that was really our life 365 for, I don't know. I mean, probably at least 5 years. It was just
and
nonstop.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the most infamous or famous portions of this course was this rewarming drill that you did, which has become it's been shown a few times in the industry, and I'm too much of a wuss to do it. But
or smart.
Yeah. Well, I really would like to tell you that I'm like Rogan and some of these guys, that I was taking like, ice baths every day and all that. But I really like warm water. I'm not a big fan of cold water. So, but you conducted these things called rewarming drills, in which you had your students get in sub 50 water? I mean, it's got to be in the 40s.
Oh yeah, sometimes it was just, high 30s.
Yeah, so like freezing ass cold water in all of their gear. And then what? Tell us about that, because I think maybe a lot of my listeners maybe have never heard of it. Or
yeah, so when you have such a short amount of time with people, and you know that some of these guys, I mean, literally some of these guys in 6 months were going to be in Afghanistan, right? Probably no more than a year. That it was very real. It brought a stark reality to the people training and to the people receiving the training. And so you couldn't talk about theory. You had to talk about reality. So what we had to do with some of the exercises is force the issue to put people in situations that they had to, put the training we were talking about into play. And so the rewarming drill was one of those. So we had this technical clothing system I just talked about called PCU. Now, just at a very high level, the idea was it protected you from the elements, but it also had a lot of versatility. So as you know, you've been out there, stuff happens, right? And you can get wet. You can get wet from rain, snow, falling in a river, jumping out of a boat, whatever the case may be. But once you're wet, if you don't know what to do, if you've never been there, then you could panic. And the difference between a military guy and, say, a hunter is the military guy doesn't get to go home when he's cold, wet, or tired, whereas the hunter can choose to do that. So you have to be able to manage the worst case scenario. So what the rewarming drill did was force these guys to get wet. It forced them to get cold, which drove an urgency. It's not like we were trying to get people to quit. They'd already been through that process. It was to try to make them cold enough to drive an urgency and force them to what we called exercise the system, to understand that, one, they didn't have to panic. Two, that the gear actually did what we said it would do, right? And they could experience that and build that confidence. And then three, when you applied it in a real world environment, it's like, you're going to go do it. We're going to make you uncomfortable. And then, you know what? We're not going to just go home right away. Like, they may spend another, 12, 24 hours in the field after that. And so you kind of had to force the issue because it was just a short amount of time of training. And so that's where the rewarming drill came from. And then when I, came to Sitka, I just thought that hunters, with all the technical clothing systems we were building, may find value in that. Now there's not that urgency with hunters, and, you may be able to go out and just sweat your clothing or get wet from a rainstorm and not jump in a frozen river. But that's why we did that.
But so these guys, you make them get in the water with all their clothing on, right? For how long?
It depended on the temperature. So we'd have a thermometer we'd put in the water. We had a chart from the doctors that said if it was this cold, they could spend this much time in the water.
Okay. Interesting. So it was controlled.
It was a little bit controlled. Now, mind you, if they made you mad or something, you'd let them spend more time. And we'd actually several times, myself included, we'd had doctors come up. So one instructor would do the rewarming with the students every time. So that shows that,
oh yeah,
we're there, shared sacrifice, all that. But also, if the instructor was like, hey man, like, it's too long, we need to get out, then he would be the guy. But we would swallow these pills I think they're RFI chips.
Mm.
And then you'd get in, and then the docs would come out and they could wand you, and they could tell what your body core temperature was.
Oh, wow.
And so they kind of did that. And really, although you think you are, I mean, you're definitely going towards hypothermia. We never, that I know of, got anybody quote hypothermic, which is a very low core body temperature. But so we were really confident. Even if you thought you were going to get hurt, like, we were really confident that, we had it pretty much under control. But it did, like I said, it drove an urgency, because you get out, you're shivering, you can't talk, your hands are barely working, your feet are frozen blocks of ice, right? Like, and the whole point was, you have your gear in your backpack. That's all you need. You can get out in the worst case scenario, totally soaked. You can set up your tent. You can get inside that tent in your sleeping bag, and with warm food and warm water produced by your stove, within a few hours, a short amount of time, you can dry that system and then continue on, with the mission. In this case, for a hunter, it'd be the hunt. Because sometimes you're in a position in the backcountry, like when you guys were, way in there sheep hunting or something. It's not like somebody could necessarily come get you if the weather was bad. Couldn't fly a helo, couldn't fly a plane. So if you got wet and cold, like, you kind of needed to be able to deal with it on your own. And that's what we were teaching those guys.
So they get in their sleeping bag soaking wet with their boots on too?
They take the boots off at that point, but
okay.
Yeah.
So their boots are inside the tent or outside the tent?
Just in the vestibule right outside the tent.
So they're still in all their clothes, their socks, everything.
Everything.
But and correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've watched this, but they have dry, puffy stuff. Is that true?
Yes. So generally speaking, now I've done it with the puffy and everything's totally soaked, but generally speaking, we'll call that their operational gear is what's wet. And then their sleeping bag and their puffy is in their backpack, and that's in a dry sack or something like that. So that's dry.
Okay. So
yep. Other than that, everything they own is just completely wet and frozen.
Okay. So but in most cases, they get out of the water. What do? Put the puffy on, pants and jacket, and then get in their sleeping bag?
Puffy, pants, and jacket go on immediately, and a beanie.
Oh, any type of beanie?
Any type of beanie, normally a wool beanie, but and we had a very prescribed system. So, it's not like I had to worry about, one person having a puffy jacket or sleeping bag that didn't work. Like, we knew it worked. That was the whole point of the exercise, is to show them it worked. This is why I'm such a proponent now of telling hunters, like, listen, I don't care what you buy or what you use, but I do believe you should go and try it. Maybe not to the extremes that we're talking right this second, but you should go try it and make sure it lives up to your expectations. Because if not, then you're taking my word for it, from my brand or your experience, but that person doesn't have the experience on their own and the confidence. So we wanted to say, listen, this system works. This builds confidence with you, but literally just the most extreme situation, and because most of what we were teaching were Navy guys for the most part are around water. You could do a parachute jump into the water wearing a dry suit and the zipper fail and you get soaked, or swim in from a boat and the dry suit get a hole in it and you get soaked, or, there's just the possibilities of getting wet outside are just endless.
Right.
And you just can't say I quit. So
no,
you
don't have that option. That's a really good delineation.
You don't have that option. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that before. We oftentimes think we're tough, or like that sometimes hunters think they're a lot cooler than they are. But the reality is, like, it's still a recreational activity that we're fortunate to go do, but we do have the option to not do it. Whereas
you have the option to not do it, but you can get yourself in situations where you can't necessarily leave quickly,
especially in backcountry hunting, especially up north.
Yep. That's where, when you start to do those kind of hunts, that's where you're really starting to, get into the graduate level hunting, I call it. And you really should have a much better understanding of how everything works in kind of not, if not worst case scenarios, and then poor situations. Because if not, you're just taking my word for it, and
Yeah.
who am I, right?
No, I mean it's totally true, man. And even like I've been around hunting my whole life, and even every single year I still come out with a list of things that were, an inferior piece of gear that could be better, or something I screwed up that, like, God, thank God this didn't happen because my water filter was broken, or
Yeah.
like stupid things. And it's aggravating as hell because you put so much time and preparation into this. But the reality is like the wild country that you're in does not want you there. It doesn't care about you. And if you fuck up something and you forget a piece of gear, or like especially mission critical gear, or it's broken, like it's a real bad problem. This year, I was on a hunt in Colorado, and a friend of mine, we thought he hit a bull, and we were like right at dark, 3 miles from the truck, and like 2,500 feet in a canyon, and
Oh, wow.
it was in November.
Oh, wow.
And so
Yeah.
basically we were going to be out there all night looking for this elk.
Yeah.
And when we got to, we didn't know if there was any water there. And like, this is the type of thing, if you get a little too confident and you're like, should we have shot at that bull? Technically, probably not. But we've been doing this long enough to where we think we can figure out anything. Anyways, long story short, we found a little puddle of water, and I realized that I had forgotten. What did I forget? I think it might have been my water, my pen, my water, my
Oh,
UV
Steri
pen.
pen. Yeah.
Luckily, my buddies had them, but I didn't have mine. And I'm like, dude, if I would, like, let's just say they're like, hey, David, go look for that bull. We're gonna walk back up and get XYZ. And it's like I'd have got down there, I would have ran out of water. And it was not an easy hike back up through scrub oaks and
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And I've been doing this my whole life for 40 years. And so it's almost seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is why I really like what you're doing, John, because I watch your videos and I'm like, God, why am I still learning? I feel like I should be like, I've been around this my whole life, but like I sit and I watch, I'm like, I didn't fucking know that. Damn it. Like, so I feel like even you can prepare, and learn. You're still going to find yourself in situations that suck, that are really dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I can too. It's not like I'm infallible, but what I try to do and what I try to promote is, you know, take a little wet notes book, or when you get, to document that lesson, or when you get back to camp or get back home, and write down those lessons and then review them before next year. And I have notebooks full of those things, right? For all different sorts of things, not just hunting or going outside. And then, hopefully, because we'll all make those mistakes or continually make some mistakes on occasion, but we try to learn from them. And, if you just look at this as a journey, I like to say the student of the game, then it's like, yeah, you've been doing this 40 years. And believe me, you probably forgot a lot, right? Like, so much, you've forgotten a lot that some people might not even know. But there are certain things we will continue to, like, I went out, I don't know, a month ago or something on my first overnight winter trip. And I was like, oh yeah, like I forgot about that. And oh yeah, I forgot this sucks. And, but you just try to make, over time, you hope you make fewer and fewer of those mistakes, and that the ones you do make aren't critical. Like, luckily your buddy had the Steri pen, but listen, I've had Jardy. I don't know about you. I never want that again.
No, I don't
ever.
want it. Lamper's got it this year, and he's way tougher than I am, and he said it sucked.
Oh my God, it's the worst. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
The most embarrassing moment in this regard for me was a couple years ago when I stabbed myself in the leg with an arrow. And the only
that's a great, talk about this.
Yeah,
It's a great one.
The only reason it happened, for those of you who haven't watched this embarrassing video, I don't know why I'm plugging it, because I don't really want, the only reason I want you to watch it is to learn from it. But
because people can learn from it.
Yeah. So I was hunting in Northwest Oregon with Corey Jacobson, and and the Elk 101 crew, Donnie. And we were busting down through like tall ferns and salmon berries. And the guys were a little ways ahead of me, and I was like picking huckleberries and eating them and whatever. And anyways, I was pushing my way through the brush with my bow ahead of me, like, I don't know if you can see me, kind of like this, if people that are watching, like pushing the brush out of the way with my bow and like kind of ducking underneath it, which is probably a stupid idea in the first place, but I was just doing it. And unbeknownst to me, an arrow fell out of my quiver. And I shoot like 200 grain, 3-blade Valkyrie broadheads that are nasty. I mean, you do not want to get it.
Probably the most dangerous broadhead on the planet.
Yes. And I'm busting down through this brush. This arrow dropped out. I didn't know about it. It's stuck in the dirt by the knock in the ferns. So like I lift my leg to go down through the ferns and just stick it right in my leg. And I feel this sharp pain. I immediately knew what it was because I'm not an idiot. And I just dropped everything, grabbed my leg, stopped the bleeding. Anyways, you can watch the video to see how it played out. But my point in telling this story is at the end of that video, Corey says, look, this was a great example of missing one detail with your gear that almost cost big. And it was a stupid detail. You know what it was? It was the little arrow grabbers in the quiver. I shoot skinny shaft arrows in a bow quiver. If you shoot skinny, a lot of these quivers are designed for the more normal diameter shafts. And I didn't have them optimally secured. I'd made it through a couple seasons with the way they were. It was fine, but the also the foam inside the quiver, I just used it for a few years in a row without changing it. And those heavy arrows are so top heavy. When you're walking with the knock down, those arrows are always wanting to come out because those broadheads are so heavy. So if you have the foam kind of failing and then also the little grabbers not doing their job and the weight of the broadhead and you're in brush, it's going to grab it and it's going to fall out. And actually the dumbest and most embarrassing part of that video is it happened the night before when we were hiking out in the dark. And you can see this on the film too. And we just joked about it. Oh my God, can you imagine if someone would have walked into that? I literally said that. And then, we were so tired when we got back to camp, we didn't even think of fixing it. It would have taken like a screwdriver and like 5 seconds to fix. So the learning was, God, I've been doing this a long time, but I can still make mistakes. I'm a freaking airhead. How did I not think of that?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I saw that one. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so glad you're okay. And Corey was there and Donnie, and they had a med kit. But I learned from that, and I switched from 5 mil to 4 mil arrows, and I obsessed on making sure that those arrows cannot come out of the quiver because I saw that, and that, luckily it turned out okay, but it certainly could have turned out a lot worse.
Yeah, and it's crazy because at the time I'm like, who does this? You idiot. And even when I posted it, I took some shit. They're like, oh, you must be, you're a beginner. You don't know what you're doing. How could you ever do that? Blah, 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 blah. And, but in my private messages, I was getting messages like, dude, I'm not going to post it, but I did the exact same thing. And then one guy, he says, and I can't remember how long after, it was some period after, he reached out to me and he's like, hey, I have to apologize to you. The day that happened, I was like to my buddies, like, what an idiot. How could he do that? Blah, 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 blah. And the next day, he was hunting, I think in Montana, if I'm correct. And he tripped going down a steep hill, and one of his arrows fell out of his quiver and went all the way through his quad.
Oh my God.
Missed the femoral artery.
Wow.
But he had to get life flighted out of there. So he's like, dude, I have a huge apology. I made fun of you. I thought no one, who knows what they're doing would ever have this happen. And then the next day it happened to me. And I got probably, I don't know, 10, 15 of those. Not the next day story, but like it happened to them. But even more, because the second part of that, to your point, John, which I didn't add, was I learned what I didn't have in my pack. I was the same as everybody else. I buy like some bullshit first aid kit from REI that I never even look in. I have no idea what's in there. Not a clue. And even if you do open it, it's like a a hodgepodge of like plastic and white paper and tiny little letters. Like if you're hurt, you don't have time to sift through that or even act like it. So Donnie and Corey fixed my leg with with duct tape, a little bit of athletic tape, duct tape, a lighter for pressure. And because honestly, we had inferior kits. And so after that, we all now have tourniquets, blood clotting stuff, and I actually carry a pretty heavy first aid kit now, which most backcountry guys would probably laugh at me, but I don't care. I carry a pretty, it's pretty legit. Like, I don't think there's anything I don't have now because I don't really want to die elk hunting. That's not how I want to go.
Yeah, no. Well, I'll tell you the difference between the beginner or somebody who's, just a few years into that journey and somebody like yourself who's been doing it for 40 years. The reality is that the more time we spend out in the backcountry, the more time we spend outside, outdoors, in the mountains, the better the odds that something will happen. Like the longer you're out there, the bigger the odds it's going to happen. Now, hopefully also the better the odds that you're prepared to manage that situation, right? But somebody who's bow hunted for 1 or 2 years probably hasn't had that experience, but over the course of 40 years, it happened twice, but on one trip, right? And you guys were capable of managing the situation. I've lost hunting in Alaska. I mean, I can't tell you until, not that I even thought something like happened to you would happen to me, but I'd get to the top of a climb going up through brush. I had started out with 5 or 6 arrows and I had 2 or 3 when I got up there.
Oh,
I had no idea where they went.
Yeah.
So, but even my thought process didn't go, well, I could have stepped on it or my buddy could have stepped on it.
Well, that same year, South Cox.
I know.
Actually, I think it might have been a couple weeks before this. Actually, he shot a mule deer, and when he went to track the mule deer, he couldn't find his arrow. It must have like gone through the deer or whatever. And he's on the blood trail. And I think the story is that the half the arrow had broken off, and the broadhead side was in the trail, and he didn't see it, and it went into his ankle, right above his ankle, which I think
it almost cut his. What was that? The Achilles. It didn't cut his Achilles, cut through it, but I think it came close, right?
I actually think where his hit was a little bit more dangerous than where mine hit in terms of, I think there's a pretty good artery not too far from where he was, like the end of one anyway. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but the point is shit happens, and John Barklow's job is to, provide. It's really cool too what you're doing, John, in terms of providing a lot of free information for people. It's like, if you don't listen to free information, I just don't know what to do with you. Like if you're going to go out in the woods, and another good example of this is like Remy Warren's new podcast. Like I was listening to a portion of Remy Warren's new podcast last night, and his podcast is all about like hunting strategy, and it comes from years and years and hundreds of days doing it, that you can glean wisdom from. You don't have to listen to everything or do everything, but you can cherry pick it, guys. You can cherry pick it and apply it to your life, and it'll save you so much time and potentially like save your life in some cases, especially if you're doing some of the more extreme stuff. And with you, John, with knowledge from the storms, and you're sharing all this free information, I hope a lot of people are paying attention, and I know they will because you're highly respected.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, David. As you know, when you and I first started working together, I'm not even sure I had an Instagram account or any kind of social media. Yeah, but what I realized is, one, I realized I miss teaching. I kind of really enjoy that. 2, that I'd had 30 years of these unique experiences that, honestly, if I didn't pass on the knowledge to whoever was interested, I was really being a very selfish person by not at least, giving it out. And so a bunch of things, kind of transpired, and so here we are, and the response has been great. And, if people are interested, that's awesome. Listen, I can learn as much from the people listening to the information and saying, well, hey, have you ever thought about doing it this way? Like, I've learned things from them as well. And to me, I think it's definitely a two-way street, and you should never think that you know it all by any means.
What's your goal with it?
It's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay, so your answer automatically brings me to what I thought was the case, which is this is just something you're passionate about. And being around you for the last several years, you're a great teacher, and you're well spoken. People tend to listen to you. You're authoritative, and you know what the hell you're talking about. So I think that's a really good mission. One of the things I've admired about you, John, is your level of discipline in everything you do. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And I don't know if that's something that you got from the military or where this came from, because as you know, the David Brinker that you know is I work on discipline, but I could be more disciplined. I'm kind of an airhead and sometimes unorganized. So where does that come from? Like, where do you get your discipline? Like with archery, for those that don't know, John's one of the greatest archery shots. Like he's such a great shot, but it's not because he knows anything more than anybody else, I don't think, or even that.
No, I don't.
I'm not a big believer even in arguing talent into the equation, because I think he's talented, but I don't think that's it either. I think what it is his level of discipline and process in shooting or work, or it seems like just about everything you do is remarkable.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I don't often think of myself that way, but I'll tell you, so part of it's personality. It's just part of it is who we are and you know, what we're born with. But I'll tell you where I think some of the things that you're referring to come from are, again, going back to being in the military, from the, you know, basically the day I stepped in, and the things I did, either, you know, got trained in, did in the real world, taught other people to do, were what most people would consider high risk. And when you're working in a high risk environment, you have to be disciplined enough to go through a process that kind of mitigates the risk so that it's manageable, right? Because if not, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to potentially kill someone else. And that's not good for a lot of reasons, right? And so, you know, probably when you met me, of course, I was out of the military, but that mentality, that mindset that, you know, to me, I train, you know, I don't work out, I train. I don't shoot, I train, right? I don't go hiking, I train. And so there's a goal in mind. I'm trying to achieve something. And so that's where it probably comes off as very disciplined. You know, I'm a person that documents everything. Like I said, I've got every hunting season I've ever done. I've got lessons learned, what I did, where I went, how many arrows I shot. But I try to learn from that. And I'm not saying anybody else needs to do that, but I think that because of that, I felt like I had information that I could pass on to other people that, you know, maybe they could glean something here or there to help them be the better version of themselves.
I hope you don't have a notebook on our Lanai hunt, because the numbers of arrow shot would take up multiple pages, but we can talk about that another time.
I do actually have that, though. But
I don't want to read that notebook.
Yeah, sometimes they're embarrassing to go back and read, but yeah.
Well, that's a very humble answer. But I think it's much easier said than done. Right? Because
it's much easier said than done.
It's you know, you and I have talked about shooting a lot because we share a passion in shooting, and like our mutual friend Joel Turner talks a lot about this, but it's like anybody can be disciplined when things are easy. Or like you can work out when you feel good.
Absolutely.
You can shoot an arrow when no one's around. You can, whatever the situation, you can catch a wave. If you're a surfer, you can catch a cool wave when no one's looking, or, you know, there's no pressure. But when you enter stress into any equation, especially high stakes stress, like being in the military, which is like the highest stakes, your life is on the line, or your buddies' lives are on the line. staying disciplined and running processes in those cases is so fucking hard for anybody normal that's wired. Like, I know it's hard for me because your brain's like entering this fight or flight response, like all the different psychological aspects to it. It's much easier to either run away or half-ass something to get out of the stress, find an exit. But my experience with you in work and in the field, both are the same thing, which is when you get under a lot of stress, you still manage to go through your shot process if you're shooting at a big buck. If you're under stress at work, like there's a lot of, like you're working on a hard project and there's a lot of pressure to get it done, and like there's 17 different opinions about what it should be. You stay steadfast, you hold your ground, you run a process, and you stay disciplined. Not to say that you don't, you're a great listener too, but I've just always find that fascinating about you. And I it's something I got to work on in my life.
Yeah, well, like I said, some of it's personality. I think some of it's just my background. But that's why I'm a big proponent of, because we're so passionate about hunting, you and I, about hunters taking a little bit more proactive approach to, again, what I call training, right? So listen, if you go and shoot on the flat range and you don't do ever anything that's ever stress inducing or difficult shots, or, however you choose to implement that, there's lots of ways, like you don't know how you're going to react in that high stress situation. Right. I have, some loose training written down that I'm going to go do, say, out in the gym. But when I go out there, there'll be days where I don't want to go. And I can kind of quote, cheat the system. I can turn the heat on in my barn. I can crank the music up, something really motivating. But instead, you know what I'll do? I'll go in there. I'll keep the heat off, so it'll be cold, and I won't run any music. So I have to deal with my thoughts. And so at that point, I'm probably not training my body as much as I'm training my mind to be in a stressful situation, to force myself to do something I don't want to do. And then I come out of it feeling better, but it's a small little step in the right direction. Because when we're out there, you have to climb out of the 2,500 deep hole or whatever the case may be. Like, I think people that are, not saying you, but people that are untested because they haven't been in those situations, that's when doubt comes in. That's when you start making poor decisions, and that's when mistakes happen, and that's when accidents occur, right? So if you train kind of with, not every single day, not every single session, but with that in mind, a very focused approach to training to become better for a certain thing, that mindset does start to take over a lot of other aspects of your life. And you're like, oh yeah, okay, this PowerPoint presentation I have to build, and I got to do it over the weekend, and it's stressful. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't suck as much as going to the gym when it's -20 out and doing a workout for an hour with no music. Like, that sucked.
Yeah.
What would you rather do? I'll build a PowerPoint, right? And so you just start to measure things off each other.
Yeah,
but, that's how I do it.
It's like my friend Hillary Lampers and I talked about this on another episode, but introducing positive stress into your life is the antidote to negative stress. It's like, because
that's great. Yeah,
you build like a resilience to it, and you almost crave it. Like, if you don't have it, and I'm not saying
I do. I crave the positive stress. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like one of these things, it's like you make friends with your enemies in a way. And like one of the enemies of humans is stress, and not only stress, but stress when it's really inconvenient. That's why working out every day is so freaking hard, because you'll do it one day because you're like, yeah, I'm all jacked up. I got the right music playing. I slept good. My wife wasn't mad at me today. But then 2 days later, you're in a shitty situation at work. Your wife yelled at you. You don't feel good. You got a cold. It's the most important to do it that day, because then if you do it that day, you're like, I know on the days where I'm not having a shitty day, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy, but easier said than done. Um,
Well, like
but,
when COVID started, what, 2 years ago?
mhm.
That was, so let's just say April. Yeah. So about 2 years ago. And I just realized I'm like, okay, I'm working from home. So that's going to be a totally different lifestyle. I'll probably have a little more time because I'm not spending an hour a day driving back and forth. And so I said, listen, it's going to be real easy to get lazy, to get fat, to drink too much, and to waste my time, right? Watching TV or whatever. And so I said, that's the easy thing to do. I'm going to do just the opposite. I stopped drinking. I got on a really solid workout routine because I didn't have to
You
travel
stopped
anywhere.
drinking? You
I
stopped,
did
you put away, you put away your bourbon?
6 months straight.
Dude,
Yep.
this is a whole new John Barklow. Not, I'm
Yeah.
not saying he's not an alcoholic, but he does like a sip of bourbon.
Yes, I do. So anyways, I quit drinking. I got on a solid workout routine.
Yeah.
I started a new business, right? My first business. I said, I'm going to do the opposite because that is the more difficult thing to do. And I don't want to come out of COVID having wasted this unique opportunity in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we can all decide, what do you want to do? It's like most times in my life, the easy path is never the right one. It's always a more difficult route that ends up being the right one for me. And I feel better for it after the fact, not always while I'm doing it, but after the fact. And you know what? Not to turn it back on you. I know it's your show, but like I told you 2 years ago, you inspired me. Well, before then, when you went out on your own, but then 2 years ago when we talked in person at the show, you inspired me. And I'm telling you, you are one of the inspirations for me doing some of the things I've done since then, because I was like, I know this guy. Listen, it's not like if David can do it, I can do it, but it's like, here's a person I know who is a living embodiment of what I want to do. I'm going to use that as an example to build upon to get where I want to go. And I think that's what we do. And we have mentors in our lives. We have inspirations. Every one of us has it if we know it or not. And that's what I think
I appreciate
helps.
that.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I mean, it means a lot to me. I think most people don't look at the world that way. And
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's because it's hard. Hard things. Do you know who Ryan Mickler is?
Oh yeah.
So he said something one day that I thought was a really cool dad inspiration, because he's a father like I am. He said, "Micklers do hard things."
There you go.
And so I've told my kids that a couple times. I just replaced his name with mine, and I totally stole it from you, Ryan. But I hope that's not trademarked. I used it on my kids because every once in a while my kids will be like, "But that's hard," and it's like, that's exactly why I'm telling you to do it.
Build that culture, build that into their life, and they won't know any better.
But it almost feels unnatural. And so it's like something you have to instigate into your life, but it's because it's like, why would I want to make my life harder? Well, it's like, you want to make your life positively harder. So when the negative hard stuff happens, it's not quite as hard, right?
Yeah. You kind of inoculate yourself from the hard things you can't control, because you've hardened yourself over time with the things you can control, right?
Yes.
So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. So it sounds like you've always craved adventure. You said something in the beginning, the adventure of it is what drew me to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adventure is one of these topics that I'm fascinated with, because everybody defines it differently, but I can pretty much assume we have a similar perspective on it, which is you crave adventure, not for the outcome, but for the actual process of the adventure. That's why you like backcountry skiing and archery hunting. Like, you could have chose a long range rifle, but you choose a bow, which 99% of the time in the field you fail. Right?
Yeah.
Like, there's like a 30-second period where you're successful, and then the process starts over again. And then you got to pretend like the whole trip was a success, even though it was a grueling mess and it wasn't, it was really hard. But you actually seek that. And I think that's one fascinating thing about hunters is it's almost like there's the literal hunting, but it's almost like you love hunting, like, just generally in life. Like, you like the idea of waking up and not knowing what you're going to see or do for that moment in time, and craving that, and knowing that if I can get out the other side of this, I'm going to feel better about myself. And so I don't know. I think it's fascinating, especially with hunters. I know it applies to every endeavor, but for John and I, since we're hunters, it makes sense to me because we're addicted to a sport, whatever you want to call it, an activity that is pretty much miserable most of the time. Like it's not like you're laying under a palm tree with a margarita and like sleeping in till 9 and going and getting a massage from a beautiful Hawaiian lady. It's like you're waking up oftentimes 2-3 hours before daylight. It's pitch black. It's cold. You didn't sleep that well. Kind of good. You're hungry. You're kind of always kind of hungry, and you're kind of always kind of thirsty. But you can't drink or eat too much because then you and then your gear works just good enough to keep you safe and kind of comfortable, but it's not like you're living a luxurious life. And then you almost sometimes kind of find game, but most of the time you don't. And most of the time you think you know what you're doing, then you find out you still don't know what you're doing, and the game's more smart. So it's like,
Sounds like life.
It does. That's what I'm saying. That's the analogy I'm trying to draw. I've been trying to work it out in my head, but it's like, if you can become okay with that process and like actually learn to crave that, life becomes better, because that is life. You wake up, you don't know what the hell's going to happen today. I mean, we can all pretend that we have, like, even the people in my life that have the most structured lives, like they go to work at 9, they come back at 5, like everything is laid out. Even them, they don't know what's going to happen today.
Yeah, but you know what? Just like hunting, when it does work, and you get the reward, it's pretty doggone good.
It makes it all, and then you pretend that the whole time was luxurious. It's
right.
I killed a bull on day 10, and up until day 9.5, you were miserable.
Yeah, questioning why you were out there.
Yeah, like, what the hell am I doing? My family's, I should go home. This is a waste. It's too hot. The wind's wrong. There's blah, blah, blah. I'm hungry. I'm running out of food. And then you kill a bull and you're like, dude, that was awesome. Let's do that again. My other analogy is that my wife thinks it's funny is like, I relate it to like pregnancy with with women. When my son Davey was born, he like popped out of the chute after 9 months of my wife, like, it's hard on their body. It's like the guy has it easy, even though I joke around and tell her that was really rough on me. When he came out, like 5 seconds later, she goes, I think I want another. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? You're literally like bleeding.
Wow.
I know, but
it's tough.
It's the same type of thing. For 9 months, it was really hard. And then you get over that hump, you have the baby, and then all of a sudden, like, just this natural thing in your head's like, in the moment, it was really hard, but I want to do that again. Like, that's how hunting is, and tying it back to adventure, I think. But that shows in the life that you've built, which I think is a really interesting life. Like, you went from, military background into training and survival in the harshest environments in the North to, all of a sudden here you are working at the leading apparel company in the hunting space in the world. Do you look back and have any regrets?
No. I've thought about this a lot just over the years, because you're like, man, I wished I'd done that or this, but you can't look at it that way, because you have to look, I think, at the whole trajectory of how you got where you are now. And there's always going to be ups and downs, right? And there's always going to be mistakes you make. But if you're kind of in the place you are, and it's where you generally want to be, you really can't question the moves you made. To me, like, there's these windows or doors that open and close in your life, and there are opportunities, and they open and they close, and you don't know how long they're going to stay open. Very rarely are they open very long, but very rarely do they ever open again. Right. And so you kind of have to, for me anyways, I've always known the general direction I wanted to go, the general trajectory I wanted to take, but I didn't know all the steps in the process. I didn't know I never said I wanted to work for Sitka Gear. I never even said I wanted to work in the hunting industry. I started out by saying I wanted to leave home and seek adventure. I wanted to serve my country. I knew those two things. Everything else I've kind of figured out, but everything has moved me in the same trajectory to get me where I am. So, I'm in my 50s. I'm still working, or I'm still having adventures. I'm still teaching, like all these things. It's like I've got this big background from the military that I built on, but the trajectory has gotten me in a good place. I'm happy where I am. I had, if you'd have told me 20 years ago I'd work in the apparel industry, I'd have laughed at you. But I had a certain direction I wanted to go. I've taken opportunities when they've come, and I felt that they were good because I didn't have to hesitate too much if they were moving me in the right direction. So no, I generally don't have any big regrets, certainly, by any means, but yeah, there's probably a few things I'd have done different, but I think we could all say that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all human, so we've all made mistakes, but I mean, I haven't ended up in jail or anything yet, so I guess I'm doing something okay.
Well, that is an accomplishment.
It's all how you measure it.
That's interesting how you said that, though. The kind of getting a general direction, and not being too hard on yourself on whether
Right.
like defining everything. I oftentimes, and I see this with my kids sometimes, they try to define too much in advance.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, I value this and this. Like for you, it was adventure and serving your country. I value those two things, so I kind of know I'm headed this way. What happens now, I don't know, but that's also part of the adventure. And I think if you just kind of point your nose in the right direction, you also, which you had the ability to do, which is hard, is have the ability to recognize an opportunity when it comes and realize that it's fleeting. I won't talk about them, but I have a couple things in that front that I regret where opportunities came and you stew on them too long, even though they feel really good. And in this age of like constant data and like knowing everything prior to doing something, well, that's not how risk works, and that's not how adventure works. You can only know so much before you enter into any endeavor. But like what it seems like with you, you got that general direction, and you start moving that direction. And then when a door opens, you were wise enough to be like, "That's pretty cool. I'm doing it, and it's in the right direction." Boom, you're training people. Boom, you're working at Sitka, and you keep doing that, and pretty soon you live a pretty good, damn good life. It seems like.
Yeah. Well, I've been fortunate that, my gut, if I listen to my gut, I've almost always been right. Mm. And like I said, most times when I come to not necessarily, a T in the road, but maybe just a Y in the road, and you go left or right, and left is easy and right is more difficult. Every time I've taken the more difficult path, it's always been the right one. And every time I started down an easy path, it's never been the right one for me.
How do you know though, when like, if you have a hard decision, how do you know, like, how sometimes you'll do something where you're kind of swimming upstream and eventually you got to cut the slack and just move a different direction. Yeah. How do you know if something's just hard for a good reason or hard meaning it's not working out?
Well, I think that's where the gut comes in. So to make the decision, I think you make that on your gut. But then once you start down that path, I think that's when you're like, listen, this is hard, but this is not the right thing for me, right? Sometimes it could be easy and not the right thing for you.
Right.
Like leaving the federal government, like there was nobody telling me to leave the federal government, left the military, got a job with the government. Like I could have worked there I could still be working there, but I knew that the best decision for me was going to be the most difficult, which is to cut ties with everything I built for 26 years and go out into a completely different industry, try to make it not quote on my own, but not with the backing of the whole environment that I built behind me, and try to figure it out, because I knew that for personal growth, that's what I needed. So, now maybe that wouldn't have worked, and I'd have gone begging back to the military, right, to the government. But I was like, I can make this work. I know that this is the right thing for me to do. And listen, for me, like I said, if I have to go, man, like sometimes the easy thing, you just go, yeah, you hit it and it's good. But for the most part, it's like, if I have to stew on this and go, this is a growth opportunity, but it's going to be difficult, that's normally the best course of action for me.
That's interesting. So you took, you like I said, you built a really interesting life. What would you tell people that are out there struggling, trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, or maybe they have aspirations or dreams or whatever you want to call them, and they're just kind of scared to jump in the cold water, for no pun intended.
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
Well, I don't know if I'm that wise, but there's a few things, that I've learned looking back, right, in hindsight. And the first one was, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, how did I get where I'd gotten at that point? I'd have said, because I'm good, because I'm disciplined, because I got lucky. And all those things are true. But the one thing that I kind of discounted or didn't give enough credit to is the mentors that I realized I'd had in my life that had helped me get where I went. Every kind of big decision point or, big why in the road of my life, when I looked back, I had a mentor there that I could talk to, that I could trust, that I could rely on, that I could, seek his or her advice. And that absolutely helped me choose the right path, right? These big kind of moments in time. So, like I said, 10 years ago, I'd have told you I didn't have any mentors. And then upon reflection, I realized that mentors had actually had a huge impact on my life, and they had actually helped me in that trajectory. So that's the first thing. The second one is, and it's very difficult, and I find myself as much as anybody doing this, you cannot measure yourself against anybody else, especially in the day of today's day and age of social media. But, as much as you think like, I was really good at something, I know 10 guys that were better than me, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was in the military, it's like, yeah, I was maybe one of the best, but I always knew somebody who was better than me. Mm-hmm. And so you can't let that deter you. You're like, this is my path. This is for me to walk. And if I'm always measuring myself against other people, not that you can't do that at times, I think it can be very unhealthy, and it can stop people from wanting to take that risk and wanting to take that chance, because they're like, there's no way I will ever be like that person. Well, that's a defeatist attitude that will just never get you there, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, those two things just come to mind, that the mentor one, and then just trying to be your own person and not continually judge off what somebody else has done or is doing. I think will go a long way to helping people out.
Yeah, it's kind of instilling a confidence in yourself to where you're not too worried about what other people are doing. You're content with what you're doing. John, it's always a pleasure, buddy. And how can people find you? Where should I look for John Barklow?
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's at @jbarklow. That's where I do a lot of my, a weekly video, something related to the outdoors, some educational content. And then I've got a YouTube channel, and I've got a website named knowledgefromstorms.com, which are articles, newsletters, videos, a bunch of content. And that over time will continue to build out. And we'll kind of see where that goes over the next few years. But those two places, Instagram and then the YouTube and the website.
Well, and I know we didn't talk about it at all, but you guys at Sitka have a lot of exciting things going on, and always making a good products so anybody out there, check out sitkagear.com. Not that I need to help push that brand at all. But well, it's a pleasure, buddy. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And we'll have to do this again. I'd love to dive more into the hunting aspect. I think we could share some experiences.
We could tell stories for a couple hours for sure.
Yeah, we could talk about all those arrows in Lanai. Maybe we won't talk about that. All right, dude.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, David.
Well, thanks for tuning into the Altitude Show today. Make sure to get out and support those that support this show. GoHunt.com, peaksequipment.com. Also, you can support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe there and leave a 5-star review. Nothing less than 5 stars. We'll see you next week with a new guest. Have a great day, everyone.